Okay, well, I've given everyone the extra 2 minutes to walk back from the Netflix coffee booth, so I think it's reasonable for us to start back up again. So welcome back to the first TC track. This is the fourth and final session for today, so we've got 3 presentations going through. They'll take us through to the end. Starting off with things, we have Andrei Robochevsky. He'll be presenting on MANRS, looking at ways of improving routing security through mutually agreed norms. So I'll hand it over to Andrei. Are you going to stand still? Or?
Yeah, is the clicker?
The clicker, if you need it, yeah.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Andrei Robochevsky. So I'll be talking about this initiative that was started in 2014 by a group of network operators. And I'm helping to coordinate this initiative from the Internet Society side. But before we go and talk about the initiative itself, I would like to talk a little bit about the problem. So what is the problem with the security of the Internet routing system? There is a great service, it's open, available freely, which is called BGP Stream, which actually detects some incidents that are happening in the BGP routing system. And I looked at this data for 2018, and I discovered that through the year, the Internet experienced about 12,600 incidents. Almost 40% of them were routing security incidents. We'll talk about this a little bit more later, which are route leaks and hijacks. Almost 5% of all autonomous systems that operate on the Internet, and now it's about 63,000 networks operating, were affected by an incident. Almost 3,000 networks became victim of at least one incident, and about 1,300 networks caused this pain for other networks. So one snapshot is good, but it would be great to look at how system evolves. And the year before, I did the same, exactly the same analysis, looking at the same data for 2017. And if we compare, we're actually getting better. So this is great news. We have almost 10% decrease in number of incidents, almost 17% decrease in number of culprits, and about 12% decrease in number of victims of those incidents. But I think the numbers are still big, and so there is no reason to rest. And besides, we only have 2 points, or at least I have only 2 points, so it's hard to say whether it's a trend or whether it's just one data point off. Remarkably, the sort of ratio between outages and routing security incidents remain the same, about 40% to 60%. So what are those incidents? Well, there's several types. If we talk purely about control plane, about routing, there are 2 main types of incidents that are happening. One of them is route or prefix hijack. And that is when another network impersonates, in a way, another network. In fact, announcing a prefix that doesn't belong to it. A classic example of this is 2008 YouTube hijack, when Pakistan Telecom announced the prefix that belonged to YouTube, and more than half of the Internet believed that, and that caused outage for the users that were trying to look at the YouTube videos. So it's a clear denial of service attack, and sometimes it can be used also to impersonate some of the services, like it happened with a recent attack, well, relatively recent attack, Route 53, when DNS services were hijacked and therefore DNS responses were forged. A more subtle type of attack is a route leak. I have to note, when I say attack, it's attack in technical sense. Not all of those incidents are malicious attacks. Some of them are purely configuration mistakes. Well, Actually, I think most of them are configuration mistakes, but that doesn't make them less damaging, and that doesn't make them less important. So back to route leaks, it's a slightly more subtle attack when it's a violation of routing policy, basically. There is a unset principle in routing, which is called valley-free routing, which means if you are, well, one example, if you're a customer, multi-home customer of 2 transit providers, you shouldn't announce prefixes you learned from one transit provider to another transit provider. If you do that, you are creating a route leak. The reason, if there are no controls in place at the transit providers, the usual sort of policy that you prefer customer routes. And that means that if, for instance, you learned about Google prefix from one transit provider and announced this Google prefix to another transit provider, all of a sudden you became a transit provider for that second transit provider for Google prefixes, which I think will attract a lot of traffic and probably you will DDoS yourself. But it can be also done in a more subtle way. You can actually leak smaller prefixes for smaller services. And if it's done with malicious intent, that's a perfect way to inject yourself in a data path and do, for instance, reconnaissance activity. That's a passive way of doing reconnaissance activities where you can scan the traffic passing through your network, where you can look at services open, who is connecting, and get those information, which otherwise you need to scan, which is noticeable, which is indication that attack is coming. So for malicious actors, that's a very attractive and interesting way to prepare, for instance, for an attack or create a man-in-the-middle attack. Another thing which is not related, strictly related to routing, but it is related to MANRS, so I mentioned it here, and that is one of the problems which is called source IP address spoofing. And that's a root cause for reflection and amplification denial of service attacks. And though those attacks are, well, I think before there were dominant type of attacks, and now we see more attacks with direct traffic, not using reflection amplification, they're still very damaging. And as you see one example, in 2018, such an attack reached the 1.3 terabytes per second. That's quite a volume. And it's the disconnect between the cost to create this attack and the damage it creates is enormous. It's orders of magnitude, which creates a real problem. So why is it there? The main reason for those attacks is that BGP is insecure, and insecure in a way that as a protocol it doesn't have built-in validation mechanism. So whatever you get from your neighbors, announcements you get from your neighbors, you cannot verify this using the same protocol. You have to resort to out-of-band data, right? Other data sources to check that, whether it's RPKI. We'll probably talk about this a bit later, RPKI repository or Internet Routing Registry or some other sources of data. Before we go there, let's talk a little bit about the sort of zoom in the data that I showed you to give you more details what and where things are happening. So based on the same data from BGP stream, I looked at sort of regional view where what are the regions that are mostly affected. And specifically looking at APAC region, it's Melanesia that is affected and Polynesia. You see it's like about 11% of all networks operating in those regions are affected by a routing incident. But those regions from the point of operating networks are not big. I think another region is Southern Asia, which is a big region, and it also has a rate of about 80% of all networks were affected by an incident. In another part of the world, Northern Africa, it's also reaching 14%, quite a big number. Zooming in into concrete countries, you can see that Hong Kong and mainland China, followed by Oh, it's Bangladesh, but mainland China, Bangladesh, up to 30% of all networks were affected at least by one routing incident, followed by Hong Kong, mainland China, and Malaysia, reaching, well, 12, almost 12%. So again, if you look at the dynamics, how things evolved over 2 years, you can see that probably with the exception of Bangladesh and mainland China, all other countries, they managed to they experienced less damage from routing incidents. Still, the damage is pretty high. I think 10% of all networks experiencing routing incident, it's a high number. Let's look at the networks that were responsible for those incidents. And again, on regional view, I think that's Micronesia, and it's a small region. But Southeastern Asia is a big region, and we see that it's about 3.4% of networks operating in this region. They were responsible for at least one incident. In other regions, Latin American, Caribbean, and Sub-Saharan Africa, those are the regions with most percentage of culprits. When I say percentage, it's normalized by the number of networks that operate in those regions, which is, I think, a fair assessment. Again, zooming into APAC, you can see that Hong Kong and mainland China lead the list, followed by Malaysia. So those are countries where most of those culprits were located. Again, when there's some caveats in this data. For instance, attribution, where a network operates, it's based on geolocation, and you know that sometimes geolocation plays a trick. So we need to take this with a grain of salt, but I think in general it gives a more or less fair picture. Let's look at the evolution, at the dynamics. I think it's overly positive. The only exception probably China. The rest, I think there is good reduction of number of culprits. Philippines twice, some other countries, Indonesia twice, twofold decrease in number of culprits. I think that's a very good achievement. I don't know what caused that, right? If it's just a chance, or is it conscious effort from network operators in this country? That's hard to say. So why is it happening? I think we knew about those problems for decades, right? And in fact, tools that allow us to mitigate those problems, they exist. Prefix and IS path filtering that might prevent hijacking and might prevent some of route leaks. They existed forever. I mean, that's sort of best current practice for decades. We have tools like, well, new technologies like RPKI. They are more and more widely used. We have tools to deploy those technologies like RPKI validators, our tool set, and other tools. Even BGP-SEC, which is sort of security extensions to BGP that will allow us to have a secure protocol standardized 1.5 years ago, but it will take some time before things like this are deployed, of course. But even with existing tools that existed for a long time, we see not enough, not widely deployed. And another thing that, because the protocol itself is insecure, we need external data sources to validate those announcements, and those data sources are incomplete or sometimes inaccurate, hardly to rely on. But another thing to think about when we talk about security, it's not a state, it's a process, right? And in corporate sense, when people talk about security, they talk about frameworks and processes. It's very important that you have a holistic view of sort of your attack service, of your security, established processes, and not cherry pick different things which may not bring you to a secure state. But how can you establish a systemic process in a system consisting of 63,000 independent networks operating and passing traffic among each other? where security of one network depends on security of another network. So that is something to think about. Another thing to think about is that security of your own network is in the hands of other operators. There is so much you can do to secure your own network from a routing security perspective. You really rely on actions or inactions of other operators in the internet. In this classic example of YouTube hijack, there was only so much YouTube itself could have done to prevent this from happening. It was about PCCW, who was the upstream provider from Pakistan Telecom, to check the announcements they received from Pakistan Telecom and say, hey, it shouldn't be YouTube, and filter that. So you see, but there is a disconnect. I mean, YouTube operating on one side of the world, PCCW on another side of the world. It's a disconnect. How can we solve that? But in fact, I think everyone realizes that the more operators implement those practices, the better off the whole system and all operators are. But there are still little incentives. So here we go to this initiative, which is called Mutually Agreed Norms for Routing Security, and we believe that that's a viable approach to address those issues. It has two facets. One of them is creating a minimum baseline, really a tightly scoped set of recommendations distilled from best current practices that are optimized for low cost and low risk of deployment. They're very clear. There is no disputes. I think everyone agrees that's a thing that has to be done. So they have high potential to becoming a norm. And the norm is a line between acceptable and non-acceptable behavior. So if we manage to move this, and this is a social thing, right, not so much a technology thing, if we manage to move this into norm space, then we create a new normal for network operations, right, routing security in this space. But to become norms, you need to understand how widely those norms are accepted. So for this, you need a community. You need network operators that can stand up and say, yes, I implement this, right? So clear, concise baseline and growing community of operators on the other hand that stand by and support that. That's what MANRS is about. So MANRS is defining for what MANRS calls actions, because it's really not a declaration of your intentions. It's really an actionable thing. So in order to become a participant of this initiative, a network has to implement those 4 actions. Well, in fact, has to implement majority of those actions. And when network tries to join this initiative, we're checking that those actions are indeed implemented. Filtering. Now, it's not filtering in general. As I said, those actions are tightly scoped. So when we talk about filtering, we talk about that network has to filter their own announcements and the announcements they're receiving from their customers. That is something that network can control. So if you operate and if you don't know what your customers are supposed to announce, I think you're in trouble, right? But if you know that and you can implement those filters and you can ensure that there is no pollution coming from your network to the great internet. Anti-spoofing, we talked about this source IP address spoofing, and again, if you possess this information that you probably should, you are able to either use technology like URPF or implement ACLs that prevent spoof traffic leaving your network. Coordination is a very simple thing, and that is about being accessible and responsive. But it's a great thing to have when, for instance, you need to mitigate an attack. When you need to contact another network, maybe another region, another continent, and get help from them. And finally, global validation, which talks about facilitating global validation. What it means is that because you have all this information about routing, what the intentions, what is supposed to announce, please register this information in a routing repository. And those repositories are Internet Routing Registries or RPKI repository. And enable others to validate. So it's quite easy, well, quite sort of simple, and there is no news in this baseline, and that's what is asked from the MANRS participants. And of course, MANRS is not a solution, ultimate solution. It's a step in the right direction. It's a minimum baseline. It's sort of lower common denominator. But I think if we make this step as a community, we significantly improve already the state of routing security with those simple actions. So to really have an effect, what it needs is scale up, right? So how to increase MANRS adoption? So if you look at MANRS participants, I think it's a very nice graph. So we start in 2014, right? And we had some sort of uptake and then raised awareness, and there's a sort of diffusion of the knowledge about this initiative. And last year we saw it was, getting traction. We saw people coming and trying and willing to participate. So right now the initiative has reached more than 130 network operators covering more than 250 independent networks. But well, you need to be creative how you create this momentum in the community, and you need partners, of course, to create this momentum. One of the partners was sort of type of partners, pretty obvious, was IXP community. And IXPs, the result of synergy. First of all, they operate or coordinate, they have local operational community. And well, there is no such thing as global community. It consists of local communities. So if you get traction in the local, regional community, that's a great thing, right? You need sort of this kind of eye contact with your colleagues to get traction in those things. So IXPs are an exceptional place to make it happen. But how to make it happen, how to get IXPs on board, how help them to promote those routing security norms. So we discussed this with the IXP community, and a small team of IXPs was formed. And what they did, they tried to create also a set of actions of IXPs, so they can join the MANRS initiative and help to scale this up. And this resulted in the launch of this, what we call IXP partnership, IXP program in April 2018. It's also baseline. It's different from the ISPs that I showed you before. It contains of 5 actions. Well, this is a list of joining IXPs, but this is a list of actions. 2 actions are important, and therefore they are mandatory. One of the actions is very important for the routing hygiene in the IXP environment. And it says that, well, you know that many IXPs, they operate a route server. And route server is a proxy, sort of proxy network that enables multilateral peering. So if you come to a IXP that has, let's say, 100 of members, right? You have 2 choices. Either you have to set up peerings with all the members, right? And that might take some effort and time. Or you can use a route server and just set up a sort of proxy peering session with the route server, and the route server will do the rest for you. Right? So if every member sets up a peering session with the route server, the problem is solved. Everyone peers with everyone. So it's a very cost-effective, a very easy, convenient tool. But what that tool can also do, it can sort of impose a policy, a higher routing hygiene. It can say, hey, if you peer with me, I will filter based on routing data provided in, let's say, IRR. And if you register your prefixes, those prefixes will be propagated. If you don't register some of the prefixes, they will not be propagated. So there was kind of quite a high bar for IXPs, because, I mean, if you ask me, maybe 3-4 years ago, IXPs were really hands-off routing, right? It was just layer 2 environment, and the only role of IXPs was passing packets. But situation changes, and in this community there is also sense that they have to play a role. And there was also from their membership, there was a demand to play a bigger role in improving routing hygiene, in creating safe neighborhoods. So yes, they agreed to raise this bar that high. So route server, if you want to participate in the route server that gives you convenience, in return, what is asked that you register your information and you sort of maintain your data and keep it in good shape. Another action is related to the scalability, right? IXP is a partner, so promoting routing hygiene in terms of MANRS actions is very important. So we all have one reference point, which is MANRS, right? So we align our routing security efforts against this anchor, this reference point. So that's the second action. 3, 4, 5, I think that's actions that also very reasonable, like you protect your peering platform, do not allow undesired traffic there. Again, you facilitate global coordination and communication, especially among your members, so members can troubleshoot among themselves. And you provide monitoring tools, and the most obvious monitoring tool that IXPs provide is a looking glass for the route server, so you can debug some of the routing issues that you experience. So this is one sort of side of scaling up and increasing adoption. Another way is to lower barrier for adoption, right? And for this, training is, capacity building is an obvious thing. So one thing that we did, and that has been done through a BCOP process, it was done in the RIPE community. RIPE BCOP is implementation guide. So MANRS actions, they are technology agnostic. So if you look, filter or ensure that there is no incorrect routing announcements leaving your network. All right, well, that's the outcome. It looks at positive outcomes. It doesn't tell you really how to do this stuff. So implementation guide, it looks at different options and that operator can use to implement those actions. So as I said, it was developed through the BCOP process, and it was published as a RIPE document in the RIPE community. Based on this implementation guide, we created tutorials. We created 6 modules actually that are available online through the MANRS site. And this is another way, sort of more interactive way to learn about how to implement those actions, which may be useful. It can also be taught, I mean, if can be used in training materials for training organizations to sort of maybe assess the level of students that attend the course, or maybe as an examination, because each of those modules, they have a quiz, a test, so it can be a theoretical part of your training. Another thing that we are releasing very soon, we just need to sort out the licensing issues, is we create online lab. It's a virtual lab, but it runs on sort of real virtual gear, supports Cisco, Juniper, MikroTik. And the task is very simple. Students are given a clean slate network, and the task is to configure this network to become MANRS compliant. So to configure those 4 actions for this network. Again, I mean, Internet Society, for instance, is not a training organization, so we need to scale up. We are working with training partners if they can use this, for instance, as an end examination for their training courses, right? Or using this part of their normal curricula. So there are different options how to use this thing. So one of the things that we're working on is that improving credibility and transparency of this effort. So if you go to the MANRS website, what you see a table of network operators and internet exchange points that with check marks which actions they are implementing. So that looks like a self-declaration, although we check, as I said, when a network applies for participation, we check to what extent those actions are implemented. So to improve transparency, what project we create, which we call MANRS Observatory. And that the idea of this project is to continuously measure MANRS participants, but also all other networks on the internet on the level of their what we call MANRS readiness. To what extent filtering is implemented in network? To what extent anti-spoofing is implemented in a network? To what extent routing information is registered in IRR or RPKI? And well, side effect, if we measure all this stuff and we keep all this data, remember those at the beginning of the presentation I showed you some data and I showed you only 2 years. But if we keep this data, right, we can actually track the evolution of routing security over time. And that's very important because, well, now we talk about routing security in terms of specific incidents. YouTube hijack, Route 53, some other things. Important stuff. Very important to understand how things happen and what impact they're having. But it's also important to understand whether the system improves, where efforts like MANRS have any effect, right? So this MANRS observatory is twofold. It's not yet released. We have a working prototype and planning to release this mid this year. To public, so people can log in and or they can go to this website and look at the data. But I have some snapshots. Those are not mock-ups. They are real snapshots based on real data that we're collecting. So this is, for instance, a landing page of MANRS Observatory, which shows you an overview of the state of the routing system. Well, in this particular case, for January 2019, for Asia-Pacific region, APNIC region, and you can see that it's pretty good, doing pretty good on filtering side, not so good on anti-spoofing, partly because data is sparse related to anti-spoofing. Coordination, 100% readiness. If you look at the quality of internet routing registry, it's not that bad. It's 90% sort of ready, so meaning 90% of all prefixes that network announce in this region, they are properly registered in the routing registry. I think that's not a bad result. Well, RPKI is sort of on a lower side. It's lower than global average. It's about 5% here. You can also look at the number of incidents this month, which is dominated by GONS, and number of networks that caused an incident. You can also look at this sort of snapshot, how routing information, quality of routing information in the region for this month. You can also look at the historical data, right? You can track history. Right now, we start collecting data from September 2018, so there is not much sort of dynamics to show. But as time goes by, I think we will see more interesting data here. In MANRS Observatory, you can also compare. For instance, this is a comparison of RIPE NCC service region and APNIC service region, and it has a more detailed comparison. Those spider charts, they show can create specific metrics that constitute sort of this overall readiness index. And the bigger the footprint, the better the situation, right? So the ideal thing is when all the metrics 100%, that's the ideal state. And you see, well, both regions are not ideal yet. So there's some room for improvement, definitely. Or you can compare countries, and on this particular case, it's Netherlands and Belgium compared against global state. And again, you see the room for improvement. And those spider charts, they actually allow you to see in which metrics the improvement is necessary, what controls are not in place. So to finish up my presentation, wrap up why network operators should join, or IXP should join MANRS. Well, one of the reasons, if you don't have those controls, I think that's time to think about this and implement them. Not so much to join MANRS, which also sort of a byproduct, but primarily to reduce for yourself number of incidents that you might experience. If you implement this, and many networks implement much more than what MANRS is demanding, then joining MANRS is a way to demonstrate that those practices are real. They implement by network operators. They're not just BCP's paperwork and slideware. and that's very important. So joining community of security-minded operators to increase gravity of this effort, because one thing is that one network implements those actions, but another thing is many networks implement. And because of this reciprocity, it's very important to know how many networks outside are implementing this, because they are protecting your network from routing security incidents. And we are not there yet, but as time goes by, as community increases, becomes more mature, if we have more data and transparency, MANRS may become a commercial differentiator. You can say, hey, I'm a security-oriented network, I'm MANRS, and you know, we did some research and there is certain alignment. I think consumers will start looking at this as a quality mark, so that can be also taken into account. Now, well, this is a first TC, so back to sort of CERT community, how and why and should CERTs get involved in this thing? Well, CERTs, they have a role in sort of risk analysis, threat mitigation, and education training, right? And in some cases, I think routing is sort of outside the scope of work, right? Scope is more focused on, you know, computer vulnerabilities, maybe some other incidents, denial of service attacks. But routing is a fundamental problem. So I think including this within the scope of your cert is very important. This allows to demonstrate security proficiency and commitment to your constituency, because network operators, they suffer from this incident. So getting some information and coordinating maybe response to those incidents is important. Well, of course, help solve global network problems. I think that's the sort of mission of many certs. And finally, what I showed you, MANRS Observatory, that's some data, and as we develop this product, there will be also APIs available, so that might be a possibility to collaborate and do some information sharing, for instance, for your region, for your country, or for your constituency. So with this, yes, manrs.org, that's the place to go if you are interested, if you would like to learn more about this. We have also a video, that's URL, and I believe the slides will be published, so you can go there, and it might describe what I did in this half an hour in much more entertaining way with music. So, thank you.
We have gone over, started a little bit late, so we're finishing a bit late, but is there maybe one question, if anybody, time for one question, if anybody has any questions for Andre? Come on forward.
Just a quick one. I noticed Micronesia, Melanesia was a big target and also a big source of the route leak and all those types of attacks. Any ideas why that might be?
Well, in percentage, yes, but like in Micronesia, 20 networks are operating, and one was one experienced an incident. That's why numbers are so high, right? So it's just statistically they show up, but as I said, there are bigger regions that also have high percentages, and that's where we probably should focus more.
Got it. Great. Thanks.
If you could join me in thanking Andre for his presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'm here today and tomorrow, so if you're interested in sort of discussing MANRS and how we can collaborate, please find me in the hallways or elsewhere. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Okay, so the next presentation, we have Jordi and Alba that are going to be presenting on red teams. So without further ado, I'll give you your full 30 minutes and take it away.
Okay, good afternoon. We will talk about red team. We are part of a bank, so this is a red team for a bank, that is CaixaBank. CaixaBank is the first savings bank in Spain. And to get a magnitude of order, we have 14 million customers and 48,000 people working in, so it's a big bank. In our case, the red team is a mix within internal and external people. So to renovate our ideas, we time to time go to the market and get new hackers, and this is the thing. Performs attacks without any internal help, so it's totally independent, and they have to take the information on open sources or what they are able to get into the internet. So nobody helps internally. It's not limited in its actions because obviously hackers have no limits, and it's independent, totally independent for other departments. There is any contract, any liability. Here is the visible part because it's the people speaking in the world about red teamings. It's me, Jose, and David, and today Alba, that is one of the hidden persons, but today we present her in public. She will tell about the cases that we have been working this year. Some definitions, because this term of red teaming and how to use it is something that is new in the community. In our case, we want to protect our information from the customers or sensitive internal information from the organization. As an example, for example, if CaixaBank wants to invest buying a bank, a new bank in other country in Europe, this is something that if it arrived to the market before the operation could be catastrophic for us. This kind of information is that really the hackers are interested on, because they can sell this information in the underground, in the darknet, and get money for that. No? And here there are other items, no? The computer security incident response team, the networking we do. No? We are here for that. No? We do networking all over the world to get help when we have an attack, the data loss prevention, and all the infrastructure, no? Antivirus, the perimeter security, the correlations of events, etc. All these, until now, seemed to be enough to prevent the majority of the threats we had. No? But at today's days, the hackers, what they really track is big databases and information they can sell and use for a high amount of money. And for that reason is the creation of the red teams. No? A little bit of background. This is something that comes from the military, no? And because was US starting with that, and they call red team the teams that were emulating and doing simulations like they were Russians, and Russians has been stating this and said, we will create teams to do the same, but they call it the blue teams. And now, in the companies, the red team is the one attacking, and the blue team is the one defending. Here's a definition. I'm not going to read it because it's long, but it's a definition we use in the first, and has been created by the different professionals. In the first, we have a group that is the special interest group that works with red teams. And this SIG has created this information is wide. Is one of the informations, you can find others, but this is complete. On the definition, the most important thing is that, so the red team is the thinking enemy. And this is very important because, as we will see, there's a list of the things what we do. So first of all, we are secret, and secret means secret for the organization as well. So the only time that the people of our own organization see ourselves is the moment we sit down to present the results of our work. And then we disappear. They don't know if we have new faces inside. They don't know anything about us. We use open source intelligence, so we don't get any information from inside that is not public to get the attacks. We try to get information on the deep web as well. perform reconnaissance. The list is long. I'm not to go in or to enter in every one of each concept, but what is very important here is the part of the extraction of the information. And this is the thing that makes really different a red team, for example, for a penetration testing. So one of the tools we use is the penetration testing, of course. But at the end, penetration testing, go in, take a look, and do nothing more. And the part of the exfiltration is very important. Many of the facilities, companies, etc., have prevention for the exfiltration, correlate events, have alerts, and you have to trick all this to get the information out. The other question is how you get the information out. Of course, should be encrypted. You will have a protocol of security to deal with this information, but this is very important, this part. You have to extract the information and demonstrate that you can extract the information, and the exercise is not finished until there. Here are some items, possible targets attacks, no? The sensitive information, the industrial espionage, this is another important thing. Theft of assets or damage or destroy, why not? Something that is critical in the infrastructure. How we do? We are a highly organized group, multidisciplinary. Not only we have engineers or experts in intrusion, we have people, for example, talking 10 languages. So at the moment of doing the job, this is very important. Or we have people that is his specialty is the social engineering. That is 90% of our activity, no? And we try to have the similar features to those of a real attacker, no? Well, here is an example of advanced persistent threat. As I said, the important part is at the back. When we finish the attack, we do the analysis together with the blue team, and they can see where they have vulnerabilities, where they have problems. We reinforce the perimeter after this and the systems, and this is an upgrade of our security in front of real attackers. And then we work a lot on education, because in social engineering, the only effective tool really is the education and awareness. We don't have other defense for that. Well, this is the differences with a pen test. I'm not going inside this, but here is a list of what we have found to make the difference between one thing and another. And then here we have some attributes, the culture of the company. The self-criticism is very important. If you are not able to accept this, don't mount a red team inside your company, because you will have a big fight between departments, and this is not the goal of the red teaming. Should be under the safeguard of the top management. We only report the top management. We never report other people that could be high executive from other departments that have a role or a power 10 times than I have, but I never report to them. So if he wants to know something about the red team, go direct to the CEO. Don't ask me. Okay? Should be external to all the people in charge of the perimeter, all the people in charge of the security information. Why? Because you cannot be Arampar, you cannot attack yourself. If you do that, you lose a lot of skills on that, no? The careful selection of the persons, this is one of the stoppers of the red team, because the most important is the loyalty, and this is something that you get with the time. In the special interest group, in the FAIRS, we are thinking, there is another person that co-shares with me, that is Luke, that is from Canada, and we are thinking into share our hackers. This could be one manner to have new ideas, fresh blood, and loyalty, because the people who work with me for 10 years could work for luck or for other people, no? Then should be a red team leader to stop sometimes the hackers that have crazy ideas and say, hey, let's do things legal, let's do things that we can really do. And technical trustworthy is it's like in the military, you have to have a great value. It's the same here. It's something that is supposed to have for the red team. And the other important question is the continuous use. Why? Because many times in the approachment, we spend a lot of time. And during the preparation of the attacks, we can spend 1 year. So if someone in the top management is impatient, this is nothing good for the red team. And you have to explain this to the top management. Why? Because the most important asset a hacker has is the time. He has all the time to perform the attacks. And could be 1 year that is nothing, any result from the red team, but in the next, it's 3 attacks that are totally successful. No? Well, this is a scheme, is one of the schemes, so the red team leader, the people in charge of the operational, and then a people that is supporting, because we need a lot of support, a lot of information that can be retrieved by other people, and like this, the operational people can focus on the questions. No? Well, this is some war stories. I will be very fast, and Alba will present the stories of this year. This has been presented years in other forums and in Nepal, in the last Tapinic. It's how to do an approach to the Wi-Fi system when the buildings are surveyed by people with weapons. No? You cannot walk with a computer, no, and say, oh no, I am taking a walk here, no, because you will be immediately reduced. No? So we imagine how, and finally, after trying different things, we prepare this. So an innocent motorbike, inside the motorbike was all the engineering necessary to catch the Wi-Fis, and we discovered Wi-Fis that has not been in the inventory of the bank because there are people all the time doing things, and then we discover vulnerabilities and we perform the attack doing this. The second one, we have discovered that in like all the companies, people has a very active social life, no? And most of them were in LinkedIn. So we prepared this infrastructure. This infrastructure was totally anonymous in the internet. So we buy Bitcoins. After buy Bitcoins, we rent servers in the darknet. So all of this has never existed. And we prepared the attack using this infrastructure that was not easy to locate. After this, we have created a fake page of hunting, no? A headhunting page that has everything, employees, etc. You can go to the internet and see the page and watch everything, the executive, the psychologist, everything. And after this, we went to the LinkedIn profiles, select targets in our company, and send a message that states that we have a profile, we are searching a profile, and your profile matches with the person we are searching for. Everybody that we have written, they have answered to us, interested in the job. And after this, we invited them to know more, connecting to our website. And in our website, there was well, in the screen, a little screen was deployed asking for actualization of Adobe Acrobat, so something that is really common. They did okay, and with the okay, they introduced a RAT in the system, and from the RAT, we jumped inside from other computers, etc. In red teaming, we never finished telling in the conferences the real result of the attack, because it's something that obviously is secret, no? But we tell about the vectors, like these people can get ideas on how to do. And now I pass this to Alba, that will explain about the new attacks that we have performed this year. Please.
As Jordi said, we never explain the result, so I will explain more or less what have done this year and what's going on. So first of all the companies has a lot of computers. Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
I'm shorter. Okay. There are a lot of computers that are exposed to the public like, for example, a reception or the typical commercial who try to sell the product going around. And in our case, that we have a lot of branches, so there are a lot of computers that people can see. This is, for example, a reception example, that there are some USB ports accessible to us. So what we did, we went to the different branches and we tried to record everything without the employee didn't realize. And we checked the different computers, laptops, or not the other kind of computers, and see which ports of USB were easy to access in the same time that the employee were explaining us the product, or he went maybe to print some documents, and see what we can do. So in our case, we asked the employee for the one product was quite complex, so he needed to print a lot of documents and ask to his boss. So we can't have a lot of time with the computer, and he was around. For that, we need a command and control, a Trojan, and then in that computer, the Trojan was downloaded and start to work. So we prepare a USB that has all the software inside, and we just have to put it. So this is an example that how it works, this USB, if we just put it in a computer. So as you see, there appears like a small window, and then it goes down. So if in that moment the employee comes, he wouldn't see anything. It's like more or less 1 minute. And it disappears right now. So we just need 1 minute with a computer and put this USB. So if we will be able to do it, then the next step will be escalate privileges and try to exfiltrate information. The second story is try to exfiltrate data through remote desktop connection. In our case, we have the possibility to connect with a software in our place, at home, for example, or when we are traveling, and it's remote desktop connection. So it's kind of isolated system that we cannot web browse in Google or different web pages. We just can web browse in the intranet, and we can copy in, but we cannot copy out. So it seems to be very difficult to exfiltrate information in this kind of connection. So we were thinking how we can try to exfiltrate information and without being realized. So we thought about QR codes. In this kind of code, we can put a lot of information, and so we think how we can use these codes to have a file and then exfiltrate with these codes. So we split the file, then we code the file in different QWERTY codes and display these QWERTY. Then we record a video, we decode these QWERTY and rebuild the file. This is the software while we were running. We made it ourselves. And at the beginning, you will see that we have a small code with some metadata, which is important for the coding. Now we choose the file and start to codifying. And then the same thing for the coding. Of this code is homemade, let's say. So we were working on it. And the small code that we set at the beginning, we use for metadata, like, for example, size or the title of the document. And now when we are decoding, we check if what we got it is the same that we will have in this small QR. And here you see that is match. So the problem of this was the speed, which is not very faster. And we were thinking this is the velocity more or less that we have with a file of 1 giga. We need like 3 hours. So it was not the best solution. And we thought that maybe we could improve with using red, green, and blue codes and trying to be faster. So we realized that with this, we divide the velocity by 3. So it was faster if we use these colors. With this, we try to exfiltrate information in the remote connection, but we can use it for a lot of things. So we see what we can do. And
that's all. We hope you enjoy it and take some ideas for the for the next red team.
I see some questions coming up already, so just make sure to turn the microphone on, switch towards the front. You get it? Ah. It's I got mine. There you go.
Thanks, this was great. When you started, I was asking myself, what's the difference between this and penetration testing? And it sounds like you explained that. So it looks like potentially a fair amount of what you're doing is trying to do more human factors rather than pure technology. How much of this is really those human issues rather than breaking through technology? Do you have sort of a perspective about how much more effective you are because you're attacking people or attacking through people rather than?
We don't know a percentage because it's something that we need more activity to have a real percentage. But I can say that when we started with this, we tried to attack only the perimeter. And as you can imagine, a big company spends millions of dollars in protecting the perimeter, in protecting the customer information. So everything is done and is really well done. And when we started with social engineering, and now our activity is 85% social engineering, we become 10 times more effective. The attacks went more fast, and the results in the period of 1 year, we can deploy 3 or 4 exercises until the end, because we don't tell about the end, but when we gain entry inside a computer, you have to jump to others. And this is a hard work inside the organization to move inside until you get the goal that you really want to get. No? So using the social engineering, we have stepped a very fast time. For example, the target, when you target, for example, the secretariat of a VIP person, or you target persons that their job is economy, pure economy, don't know anything about computers or the basic things about computers. They know about Windows and nothing more. When you target one of those people, it's very easy to get information about everything. And then it's very easy to trick them to get inside. We never rebel. When we explain this to the blue team and to the top management, we never say names. We say the vector, but we don't point a person and say we get the entrance until there. The blue team, if they can have this information, but this is something that we have agreed before. We never will damage one of our employees with our exercises. We have to protect them all the time, but the entrance to a big company that spends a lot of money in that is through the persons, and This is something that the hackers know, and every day they step in this direction. No? Today's, for example, the phishing, the traditional phishing, is not the pages anymore. What they do is to call. They call by phone. They call by phone. They talk with the victims, and using man in the middle, they get everything from the victims. And we only can stop because we have the mules. Many of the mules have been marked before. We can stop because we have rules in the back that make a lot of, for example, if Jordi gets his month payment, no, the nomina, and never has sent a transfer to Romania, let's say, and this generates an alert. This transfer is blocked, but we work more in the back end than in the front end, because at today's days, the pages of phishing we get targeting us, only 10% is graphic. Most of them is man in the middle, phone, and social engineering.
Yeah. Okay, one follow-up question, if you don't mind. So if you were going to tell somebody this is the #1 thing you could do to reduce the effect of social engineering attacks, do you have a #1 thing to do?
The problem is the counterfeit of the social engineering. The only way we know is the education. So the only thing to stop that is to have the staff of the VIPs in a room like this, explain as many problems as we can, and then tell them, don't do this, don't accept this kind of messages, don't never do that, or please, if you have a doubt, call us. And this is something that in the time is long. You have to work a lot on that. So we are back in speed about the skills the hacker get, and we are trying to explain to the people to stop these attacks. No? But this has a double effect, because the blue team is all the time like this. What is the red team? What they will do? Let's imagine what will be the next step, and this raises our security level, raises this a lot. So as you know, because all of you are professionals, the hackers are opportunistic as well. So if they go against a company and find a lot of problems to attack and to get in, they change. And this is the intention. So we want to raise and raise and raise and maintain the blue team all the time stressed to have this level of security. But you are right, it's impossible to get 100% of security. So it's something that we have to work, and it's one more step. It's not the solution for everything, but it's one more step, and like this we try. And the company is happy with that, because every time I go to the bosses and say, give me money, they say, is it for the red team? Yes, okay, here you have. So that works.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much. If everyone could join me in thanking Jordi and Elba. Wonderful. Thank you very much.